recording. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining me in my box room in beautiful Limerick City. My name is Roisin Cahalan. I am a physio, former dancer, I'm an adjudicator and a dance researcher, and I've been researching Irish dancers for a long time, and I've written a lot about them, and I just thought this would be a nice opportunity to maybe share some of the things that I know about risk factors for injury in dancers. We were hoping to be doing this at the World Championships. Unfortunately, as you all know, that's not going ahead. So the next best thing is to do this virtually, and I will record this and make it available for people who can make it today. So what we're going to do is I'll just bring you through the plan of action. So I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, which will be very brief because you don't need to know about that. What the talk will cover, and we'll come to the others in a second. So as I said, I'm Roisin. I used to dance for the Nolan School of Dancing and then Scullery and Dalgash here in Limerick. And I was quite a successful competitive dancer. I then danced with Riverdance for about 8.5 years and was lead for a number of years there as well. I did my TC early on, and then I teach a little bit, not a whole lot. I don't have either the patience or the talent to be much of a teacher, but I do love adjudication. I'm a physio, so I used to see quite a lot of dancers. They were my main patient cohort while I was practicing. I'm now a lecturer in physiotherapy at the University of Limerick, and I did my PhD on Irish dance injuries, and I've continued to research dancers, for a number for about, I suppose, 7 or 8 years now. So I've published an awful lot on it and have written a book on it lately. So that's me. So I kind of know about dancers from physio perspective, from being a dancer, from being a teacher and adjudicator, and treating dancers and being a researcher. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to do a real quick whistle-stop tour through the level and rates of injury and pain in Irish dancers and compare that to, you're also physio, Clodagh Gray. Excellent. Thank you very much. So we are going to look at some of the research that's out there really briefly. I'm not going to bore you with any of the stats or any of that stuff, but just to give you kind of context about how much injury there is out there. And I think anybody who's a dancer will know this. Just in terms, the things we're going to talk about then obviously are the risk factors. So that's why this talk is entitled Not as Simple as You Think It Is. There's a huge amount of risk factors that are involved. Some of them are more complex than others, and we'll go through that. In terms of the Zoom thing, I've muted you all, just in terms of feedback and stuff like that, and I've turned off videos. If anybody has a question, just type it up, and we might unmute at the end if there's not too many of us, and we'll have a quick chat. And then I've also some further information about other resources or how to contact me or things that can maybe help you in your work as a teacher. So that is a delightful picture of me. Look at the head of me. Late 80s, thought I was the bomb, and thought we were great athletes. But in comparison to what dancers do now, the power, the flexibility, the strength, the control, the cardiovascular fitness, everything, the balance that dancers need. Thanks to Erin, I am very beautiful. It's just changed out of all recognition in the last 25 years. Probably since it became professional, we've seen huge changes. And going back even further, that black and white picture is a feis from the 1920s in Cork. So we're not even 100 years on, and we have, the World Championships, the pinnacle of what we do. So that's the fusion fighters there. And thanks to Chris for this picture in Glasgow a couple of years ago. So it has grown. Where am I? Aaron, that's me in the red, looking absolutely stunning. But now stop interrupting me, I'm concentrating. That's Aaron Crosby, everybody. So anyway, it really has grown, and it has changed and developed, and what dancers are doing is so complex now. And we've done it very fast, and we've done it in the absence of any guidelines about how to manage our health or our performance. So I want to do a quick talk about what makes us different from other dance genres. So ballet and contemporary, they're established for a long time. There's lots of research, there's lots of guidelines, and we don't have any of that. Our injury rates for the open level or the elite level are very, very similar to what the guys in ballet and contemporary have. So we all get injured a lot. But the stuff that makes us really different from other dance genres, the first thing is that we don't move our upper bodies. We don't move our hands. Okay, maybe professional dancers, yes, but typically competitive dancers, we don't use our hands. And our arms and our hands are really important to help us maintain our balance. So it increases the requirement on our legs and our lower limbs, particularly around our ankles, to maintain good balance. The second thing is our landing mechanics. So by that, I mean that when we land from a jump, we land on our toes. There's someone there. Can you mute your mic? I'm not sure who's come on there. I'll mute it for you. So when we land on our toes, and we land with a straight leg. So that means that all the force of our landing goes right up through our leg. In comparison to, say, ballet and contemporary, where they land on their heel, they'll plie into their landing, they'll bend their knees, and that helps dissipate force much more evenly up through the leg. So we get a lot of shock through a small area, that ball of our foot, and it's not dissipated well up our leg. Again, that's going to challenge our balance, and it's really not surprising that we have a massive amount of injuries to our feet and ankle, about 75% of injuries. The next thing is our limited repertoire. And what I mean by that is we move our legs in the same directions all the time. So if we think of clicks or overs or cuts, it's kind of, what's called the sagittal plane. We don't ever do internal hip rotation. So think of a cut and think of turning your knee, hey Cormac, the other way around. We don't do that. We don't do much extension, lifting our leg out behind us, and we don't do much adduction. So we don't bring our legs very far. So other contemporary dancers, other dancers do big split jumps. We don't do that. So in comparison to other genres, our legs move in a fairly small selection of ways. So what that means is that the same muscles get used over and over again, and other muscle groups that are really important to stabilize us don't really get developed well. Okay, so that's in terms of how we dance. There's lots of challenges that the other groups don't have. And then in terms of progression, we don't have progression guidelines to tell us when our young dancers are ready to move on. So if we think of ballet dancers going up on their blocks or up on point, they have to hit a number of milestones in terms of their dance ability before they can do that. For us, somebody's 12, we can stick them up in their pivots. And they may not be ready, they may not be strong enough, and it can just put dancers at risk a little bit. So we probably need a little bit more guidance about when we should be progressing dancers, and just guidance generally. The big other thing is competition on our dance calendar. So ballet, contemporary dancers, they're not competitive endeavors the same way we are. So they may have competition for places in companies and so on, but they don't have the feis thing, the grades, all the rest of it. Or they have grades, but they don't have Ardgrad, Mangrad, Open, and so on. So the competitive dimension to Irish dancing and the developments and the evolution, I suppose, that has stimulated has been amazing, but it also puts pressure on dancers physically and psychologically. And the dance calendar, then, is the other thing. When I danced, and several of you will know this, we finished after the World, and we took it handy, and we had the summer off. Now you could literally dance at a feis every single weekend throughout the year. So, and there's big championships dotted throughout the year. So people don't there's no big downtime period. And that's a problem. We know in adolescent athletes who who do their sport all year round without stopping, they have a much increased risk of injury. And I think that's a big issue for us as a profession, is to look at the dance calendar. And the implications of that is lots and lots and lots of pain and injury. I don't know who this child is, but I've used this picture so much because it really is the epitome of what we all see at feis, and it's awful. The kid goes down and everything stops. But there is lots of pain and injury. So I'm going to give you, as I said, a whistle-stop tour through some of the stats. So did a study a couple of years ago with about 39, 40 open elite dancers, so high-level dancers. And what we found out is when we looked at these guys aged 13 to 17 in the previous year, 84% of them had at least one injury. Now, nobody's going to be surprised by that. The little grid there shows you how many injuries these guys had over the course of a year. So I followed them up every week for a year. And you'll see that only 5 out of 37 had no injuries. So the vast majority of people are injured. Most people will have 2 to 3 injuries a year. And we know that. And this doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't tell us how severe it is. It might be a very minor injury. It might be a career-ending injury. But some of these guys were having 11, 10 injuries. Like that is the reality of what can happen with some dancers. Okay, a couple of more scary stats. So professional Irish dancers, that's me doing my Riverdance Cape thing. I reckon since I showed you a picture of me in the 80s with my horrible perm, I should be able to show you something nice. And it's nice and blurry, so it works well for everybody. So this is one of the first studies I did. So I looked at professional Irish dancers, current at the time and also retired. And over 3/4 of them had injuries, which is not surprising. And most of them had 2+ injuries during their career. More interestingly, only about 3% of those dancers never danced in pain. And most people would say they always or often danced in pain. So this acceptability of pain and injury in our culture is something that's inherent across all dance genres, and it's a bit of a problem. And what about how do we compare to other dance genres? So I did this study There's a dance school in the University of Limerick, and also they have contemporary dancers and also contemporary dancers in Trinity Laban in London, which is a big contemporary school for dancers. And again, not a lot of difference between the rates of injuries. We both got lots of injuries, but again, we saw that dancers more often than not will continue to dance when they're in pain or injured. Sometimes that's okay. You know, sometimes it's just a niggle and we can deal with it, or we could change the dance to make it all right. And most dancers like to keep going if they can. But for some people, they should not be dancing when they're injured. It's bad news, and we'll talk about that later on. Multiple injuries extremely common. So these people, again, had lots and lots of injuries. So that's your whistle stop tour. So I should get rid of that for a second. Can anybody who's there type in, where are the most common sites of pain and injury? I've already pretty much told you this. But where do you think? What body parts? So you can chat in the chat box if you want. Ankles, shins, foot, back, ankles and feet. Yeah, absolutely. So 10 marks, 10 bonus points for anyone who can identify whose silhouette that is. He's a world champion male dancer. I'll just give you that much. So this is bringing together all the literature that has looked at the epidemiology of dance, Irish dance injury. So any of the studies out there that looked at what percentage of injuries people were reporting. So foot and ankle, for the reports that we looked at, it was varying between 24 and 67%. So an awful lot of injuries were to this area. The knee, yeah, 10 to 20%. In my experience, that's more males than females, particular conditions that affect the growth plates or the insertion points of muscles, calf and shin, hip and thigh, groin, and lower back. So pretty much the lower limb, the leg, and the lower back. So none of us are surprised by this. So the big ones, I suppose, really are foot and ankle. And there's lots we can do to prevent some of those happening. So this is the lovely Kelsey Shula, this silhouette. And I'll send you on these slides afterwards if you want. And it just shows the main types of diagnosis that people have. Some of this is a bit technical, so don't worry too much about it. But again, there's loads and loads of it down, foot and ankle. Stress fractures, tendinopathies, metatarsalgia, so pain to the bones of the feet, shin splints, growth-related injuries are a big one in this group. So if we just have a quick flick, there's stress fractures, there's kind of a knee pain, Sever's disease, which is that pain that people get at the back of their heel when they start to grow. And we'll talk about that in a second. Ankle sprains. Ankle sprains is the biggest traumatic injury. And by traumatic, I mean not overuse. So of the 7 injuries that I've listed here, 6 of them are related to overuse. And that's an important thing to keep in the back of your head when we think about managing injuries in dancers. Ankle sprains then are the big traumatic, when we go and do a big jump and go over on our ankles. I'd say there is barely a dancer over the age of 15 or 16 who hasn't done something to their ankle at some stage. Posterior tibialis tendinopathy, a muscle that inserts into the foot and can affect going up and down on the toes. Plantar fasciopathy is pain in the soles of the feet from the heels radiating up, often worse in the morning. And then apophysitis. So these injuries affect adolescents, and I'll talk about that in a second. So there's a little bit of information there, but the big takeaway there is mostly it's overuse injuries, foot, ankle, knees, lower limb, and ankle sprains are the big one. Okay, so the big question is why? So I put that poll up earlier, but I realized that I can't remember how to get into it. So I just forget that. I should mess with too much with technology. But can people who are on just give me a risk factor? What do you think are the big risk factors? So this is kind of why we're all here today. What are the causes of injury in dancing? Come on, there's 20 of you on there. Someone dancing through the injury. Absolutely. Lack of strength and flexibility. Strength, not warming up. Overuse, lack of variability in training. Excellent. Flooring. Absolutely. You just keep going and I can finish the talk now. Intensity, yeah. Intensity of training. Okay, so they are all absolutely correct. Okay, so when we ask our dancers in our research, we ask them, so what do you think it is? It's all the stuff that you've kind of said there. So overuse, fatigue, accidents, previous injuries, a very big one, and you'll find that across all sports really. Poor stretching, poor warm-up, biomechanical factors. So what I mean by biomechanical factors are basically the way we're put together. So if people have very hypermobile joints, people have very poor foot alignment, So that's what our dancers typically think, and that's reflective of a lot of what you've said there. Delighted to see Cormac mentioning rest. Rest is a dirty word in dancing, and it's massively important, and we'll talk about that in a second. So they're the things that are, that dancers across genres think are affecting or that are causing us to get injured. But as I said, it's a bit more complicated than that. So this is my model of resilience and vulnerability to injury in Irish dancing. It is based on the research that I and others have done in it. It's based on research from other dance genres and sport, and it looks at a range of modifiable risk factors, stuff we can change, and unmodifiable risk factors, stuff we can't change. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'll briefly go through each of these, and we can talk about how they manifest and what we can do about them. Okay, so let's talk about the stuff we can change first of all. So there's a couple of things that we can do nothing about, and that's fine, but we need to have an awareness of it. The first one there is age. So we're all getting older, unfortunately, not much we can do about it. So the research has shown that older dancers, now we're talking maybe once you get into your mid-20s and beyond, tend to get injured a little bit more, particularly in the professional ranks. So it's just, I suppose, being a little bit vigilant as you get older, and I think that's a natural thing that happens. Gender is the other thing. In the research that I have done, there's so few males comparative to females, it's hard to find any pattern. However, some of the research that I found has found a slight increase in females in injury risk, but I think we can't be sure about that. In Irish dancing, the males and the females do a lot of similar choreography. Now, I know there is slight stylistic differences. The boys need to be a little bit sharper and a little bit, not even stronger, but there's slight different elements that the boys do that the girls don't do. If you look at something like ballet, for instance, and even contemporary, the boys lift a lot, so they get more back injuries. They can get upper limb injuries. They also do slightly bigger leaps typically. So there's differences in other genres that doesn't really apply to us, but worth being aware of. The other thing, the third one there is life stage. Now, as opposed to age, life stage is different again. So there's two periods of risk particularly. So the older, so mid-40s and beyond, so postmenopausal or approaching perimenopausal in women, and just the 40s onwards, we start to lose muscle mass, we start to lose strength, we start to lose neurons. So it's just a time that people can become more susceptible to injury. And the reason I mention that is because there's such a huge Irish dance, growth in Irish dancing for that population, and much, much older in the States and in continental Europe in particular. We've all seen fabulous displays of dancing from people in Europe in particularly, and they're all in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. So that's a risk that people need to be aware of. But the big one, I think, for open competitive Irish dancers is definitely adolescence. So in adolescence, our bones grow faster. Actually, we'll come to a slide on that, so I'll leave that for a sec. So adolescence is a key time that teachers and parents and dancers themselves need to be really vigilant. The fourth thing there is previous injury. So if you've been injured before, you're more likely to get injured again. My research in particular has shown if you've had a severe injury, that's an increased risk as well. So if we've had an injury, the lesson here is rehab, rehab, rehab. Make sure that you are absolutely better before you go back and return to dancing in a graduated way. And I'm going to do a talk in a couple of weeks, maybe not next week or the following week, about how you return to dancing after injury in a really structured and strategic way. Okay, so we said adolescents, teenagers. So it's an immense biopsychosocial period of change. So there's lots of stuff going on with teens, physically, emotionally, psychologically. It's a period of huge change. And I suppose I've teens there, but adolescents can go from 11, 12 up to the early 20s. The brain doesn't actually mature until mid-20s, and I can hear all the jokes happening outside. But so adolescence happens to people at different times. So how is I've kind of put this picture here. I couldn't get the picture of the dreaded costume when it starts to go up and up on the bum, and the mom goes, "Oh God, there's another $3,000 I have to find for a costume," or the trouser legs start to go up. So once you see that stretch happening in your teens, your adolescents, you need to be vigilant. What happens when we start to physically grow is that our bones grow first. So our bony structures grow first, and our soft tissues, our muscle, our ligaments, they grow afterwards. So that's why we can get pain in different parts of our body. First in our ankles, then in our knees, then in our hips, particularly in dancers who jump. So athletes who are very plyometric, basketball players, sprinters, field sports, but dancers in particular. So if you're doing dancing and lots of other stuff, you can really overload those structures. Don't stretch them. We make them stronger, but that's for another day as well. But because our bones are growing faster than our muscles, this can lead to reduced flexibility. It can reduce to problems with coordination. Your foot is no longer your foot that it was 3 months ago. It's bigger. Your legs are longer, and problems with strength. So this can be really tough for dancers because they go, Jesus, I was dancing brilliantly, 6 months ago, and now everything is terrible. And it happens, and it's normal, and it burns itself out. So once the growth spurt settles, it'll settle down. So supporting your dancer during this period to say, look, this is something that just happens when you grow. It's not a big deal. We'll manage it. Working on strength, ice, reducing the amount of plyometric stuff you do. So even things like taking out all the big lifts. If they do big slip chicken all jumps, just taking those out, dancing in runners, stuff like that, just managing things, and they should be able to maintain their pain at a nice low level. So it does obviously have injury implications. For most people, this is a pain issue. In very severe cases, you can actually rupture a little bit of the bone with a bit of the muscle off the bone, traction type injury or an avulsion type injury. But for most people, it's just, and it is extremely sore and painful. So it's a management issue. And on top of that, there's just teenage angst generally. So it's a difficult physical and emotional period for dancers, and they are at much increased risk of injury during this time because their body is just all over the shop. So keep an eye on them once they start to stretch. On that note, just an unhelpful dance practice, and I know this isn't going to be popular everywhere, but I'm going to say it anyway, so I like to be controversial. Putting loads or weights on the ends of ankles or the ends of wrists in adolescent dancers who are growing is harmful. They have what's called growth plates at the end of their bones, and they are soft parts. They're not fully hardened into proper bone yet, and you can damage them by weighting them unnecessarily. If that growth plate gets damaged, you can interfere with them achieving normal growth for that limb going forward. So if you have to load your dancer, you can load them, but maybe those training tops that have weights built into the shoulders or into around the training vest, something like that is much, much better if you must load your dancer. Okay. So at that stage, I might take a quick pause and ask if there's any questions. So we've looked at kind of rates of injury, sites of injury, common diagnosis, and the risk factors that we can't change. Has anyone any questions? Everybody okay so far? I get a okay from a few people there, and I'll move on. Okay, thanks Aaron, thanks Clodagh, excellent. All right, so let's talk about the stuff that we can change. Physical factors, okay? So we can make ourselves a stronger, better unit. The issues that we need to consider here are appropriate strength and conditioning, flexibility and control through range. I'll talk about that in a sec. Proprioception and balance. So proprioception is knowing where your body is in space. Looking at muscle balance and imbalances, thinking about back to that reduced repertoire. So working on the muscles that we basically neglect a little bit, working on those instead of just knackering the ones that we're overusing the muscles that we're using all the time. And then biomechanical properties. So addressing maybe some of the inbuilt problems that we have. A few guiding principles. So Scott, who is my partner with the Complete Dancing Project, is going to do a talk on this. This is a huge area in and of its own. So I would recommend that you attend that talk, and I'll put details up on that. But just a couple of guiding principles. Find somebody who understands dancers. When I worked with Scott, first of all, he didn't know anything about dancers. He went to classes, he learned about dancers, he spoke to dancers, he got a feel for it. If you can find a physio, like the Clodagh, you said that you were your physio now, find somebody who was a dancer or who was willing to learn. It's really important that they speak your language and they understand the demands of Irish dancing. Like, people might look at Riverdance and go, okay, that's what they need to do. We all know that competitive Irish dancing is hugely more demanding than what you'll do in the troupe. Okay, so find somebody who understands. Specificity is really important. We can do lots of cross-training, and cross-training is really important, but to get better at Irish dancing, you need to do Irish dancing. Okay, so adding on an extra step, step and a half, dancing that flat out at the end. That's how you get fitter for Irish dancing specifically. In terms of flexibility, there is no point being really flexible if you don't have any control. Okay, so the best way to get long and strong is like using weights, things like Russian deadlifts, and again, be guided by somebody who knows what they're doing. If you think about somebody who's very hypermobile, they might have great extension, but they'll get injured a lot because they don't have control. So when you think about flexibility, you have to think about stability hand in hand with that. Don't work the same muscles to death. So often I hear about teachers who get strength and conditioning guys in who are really well intentioned, and they'll get people out doing lots and lots of sprinting and running and kind of plyometric stuff. The problem with that is it is using all the same muscles that we already use. So the muscles that are underdeveloped but hugely necessary in Irish dancers tend to be our glutes, so our bum muscles. We tend to use our hamstrings, which aren't designed to do the same things that our butt are designed for. Our hip abductors, so the muscles at the side of your hips. So a lot of carriage problems that I've seen, or even elevation problems, have been because people have poor strength at the side of their hips, and quads muscles, okay, in front of the thighs. So you can work on those using other activities. So try and unload your legs, so our feet and our legs take an awful lot of pounding. So whether you can do some Pilates, some weights, some swimming. Swimming is fantastic cardiovascular exercise. Looking at something like the breaststroke would work on those big muscles at the bum and the side of the bum. So try to find something that you can work into your week, and we'll talk about cross-training shortly, that isn't going to just knacker out, burn out the same muscles you're using already. So be careful about who you get into your strength and conditioning. Use progressive goal-oriented exercises that replicate dancing. So when we're dancing, we need to move our legs to maintain our core in a nice posture. So try and, if you're doing, particularly I'm thinking about core exercises here, people use the plank. The plank is a bracing exercise where you don't move. Use dynamic planks. Try to maintain that nice core strength while challenging by moving your legs and breathing. And goal-oriented exercises. So if you're doing a program, it's really important that you have little goals. Could you mention the muscles that we should work on? Okay, so glutes, your gluteus maximus, so your big bum muscles, your hip abductors, so they're glute, med, min, there's a few more, and your quads. So for instance, if we think of our calves, we all have really big calves. I couldn't buy a pair of knee-high boots for years and years. I can now, unfortunately. I miss my calves. But they tend to be very strong and very tight in a lot of people, whereas a lot of people would have really glutes that don't fire at all. They're a huge muscle and they're powerful muscles, so it's important to work on those guys. So goal-oriented exercises, so set goals, record what you're doing, monitoring how you're getting on. So if you're doing training, have a notebook, make sure you know your 3 or 4 or 5 exercises. How many reps can you do day 1, 2, 3, 4? If you look back in like 2 to 3 weeks, you'll be astonished to see how your strength has increased. And it manifests in performance, it manifests in injury reduction. Just if you're stronger, things are easier. And you don't look labored, and you're not using your shoulders and your body and your elbows to try and get yourself up. So a lot of upper body stuff that's a problem in Irish dancing is nothing to do with the upper body. It's all to do with the fact that we don't have sufficient power in our hips, in our glutes, and in our legs. Balance. Okay. I posted a few little exercises for balance on my Complete Dancer website. I'd have a look at those. Balance, foot and ankle injuries, massive in Irish dancing, and one of the main reasons that they continue to reoccur is that we don't rehabilitate our balance sufficiently. So we go back and we jump around, and then we get another small twinge or another small twinge, and then it becomes something really big. So on one foot, up on your toes, eyes closed, on a wobble board, you should be able to like stand on one foot with your eyes closed for a minute. No bother. Okay. It's a thing that you can do as much as you want, as long as you're in a safe environment and you can't overdo it. Recovery, scar tissue, TENS massage your eyes. Can I come to that in a second, Ian? Because that's more about treatment of injury, and I don't really want to go down there again. And it really depends on the type of injury. So work on your balance. Brushing your teeth on the phone. So get your dancers to use this as a game. So really, I can't overstate how important balance is just to prevent and to recover from ankle injuries. Okay, stuff we can change. Let's start with the easing stuff. Training factors. So warm up, Everybody needs to do it. I think most people know how to do a good warm-up at this stage. I have a link to a video there that myself and Scott did a while back about how to do a good warm-up. There's a couple of exercises that we use. So the key things with warm-up is build it up gradually, 10 to 15 minutes. You should be lightly out of breath and ready to dance, but not absolutely murdered. And it's dynamic stretching. So it's basically stretches that move. So you don't hold your stretches during warm-up. That's for cool down. If you hold your stretches during warm-up, can actually lead to a decrease in performance. So it can reduce your power and strength by about 7%. So nice moving exercises. And one of my bugbears is people start to come in and they get ready to warm up, they take off all their clothes. Leave your clothes on while you're warming up, and you keep you warm, and then stay warm during the class. So warm up, you've got to do it. There's lots of evidence to show that it's associated with injury if you don't. Cool down. This is where we do our long stretches. We know that less people do their cool down than they do their warm up, and I can understand that. I'm brutal for doing my cool down myself, so I'm do what I say, not what I do kind of thing. So cool down, again, about 10 to 15 minutes, bring your heart rate down, prevent that lactic acid from settling so that it will cause cramping and stiffness and soreness the next day. So it's a good thing to do. Prevents things like fainting and feeling weak and woozy. And this is when we do our long stretches. So I know like dancing happens in the evening a lot of the time. There's homework, there's dinners, there's other kids coming in if you're a teacher. But even if you could stretch your hamstrings, there's two illustrations there. So your what's called your gastrocnemius, so your calf stretch with your foot forward and knee straight, and then knee bent. Two different muscles. This guy's neglected a lot. Quads, and then if you've chance to do your inside legs and your glutes, great. But if you just got hamstrings, quads, and calves done, that would be brilliant. And it does prevent soreness and delayed onset muscle soreness the next day. So you got to do that too. So you got to try and build that in if you can. Okay. The next training factor is cross training. So cross training is basically non-Irish dance related activity. It's helpful because it's that opportunity to work on the other muscles or your cardiovascular fitness or your power, but without tiring out or without overdoing the Irish dancing. What about Irish dancing? So this is some of the research that I've done lately. This is how much cross training that we have done. This is, I think, I'm not sure if this is contemporary dancers or the adolescent, the older dancers or the Irish dancers. So basically what we see, so what this is the amount of Irish dancing we're doing. So this goes up and up and down. Well, this is the adolescent. So up, down, up, down, up, down, which is bad in itself, and we'll come to that. But no matter how much or how little dancing we're doing, the kind of cross training more or less stays the same. So if we have a down period from dancing, we should be maybe focusing on our cross training here. We'd like to see that go up. So when I looked at the adolescent dancers and also an older collegiate group of dancers studying Irish dance full-time, they did about 1 to 3 hours a week, which isn't brilliant. And they did it consistently across the year. So even when they weren't Irish dancing a lot, they didn't compensate by doing other things. What we know about cross-training is that it helps with your power, it helps with your longevity as a career, it helps performance, it's really good. We see in ballet that some people are afraid that it'll build unwanted muscle mass and all the rest of it. That doesn't apply to us anyway, but it is a really powerful thing to do. And I'm just going to go back up. One of the issues with Irish dancing is that we start to specialize really young. So some kids will play hurling or something or do something else, but an awful lot of dancers just dance because it requires so much. And if they were to do other things, not only does it affect time, sometimes it affects technique as well. So if they were to do horse riding, their knees are all buckety. If they were to do ballet, they have too much turnout. So for various reasons, and it is what it is, we specialize very early. In terms of sport and wider athletic research, we know that people who specialize in one athletic activity before their mid-teens have a much higher rate of injury. And this is because the inherent cross-training that you get from doing lots and lots of different sports is really protective. So if you can, try and encourage it. So a couple of guiding principles. Again, don't overload the muscles that are already working. There's this good engine versus good technique argument. So again, if we look at running, dancers could probably run for ages because they've got a good engine, they're fit, but they may not have the technique, so they might get really, really injured. So again, be careful what you get them to do. Address identified deficits. So again, exercises that are maybe going to help those typical muscles that are weak or those patterns that are weak. Or maybe it's flexibility issue. Or maybe it's cardiovascular issues. So it doesn't always have to be strength. It can be fitness, balance, flexibility. Do stuff that address your deficits. Really important that you pick something that you or the kids like and that you have access to. So there's no point in saying swimming is excellent and you can work on X, Y, and Z and you can work on your fitness if number one, they can't swim and they hate it, or number two, they don't have access to a pool. So something that they enjoy, something that you can see a benefit for. And if possible, work it into your training calendar. So that brings me to this, okay? So this is a proposed calendar for a week, and it kind of overlaps with what I'm going to talk about next, which is load. So ideally, what I've done here is I have some strength and conditioning, I have some cross training, I have strength and conditioning again, I have some core work, I have a HIIT session, higher intensity interval training, I have some balance work, some cross training. So I've integrated it into my week of work, okay? You'll also see, Cormac, you'll be delighted to see this, at least 1 to 2 days of rest in my week. And that is part of my calendar. That is a vital part of my calendar, okay? So what you'll see is we'll have class, 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 fesh. There's 4 dancing days there. And I'm alternating kind of light and heavy days. So lights and balance, that's going to be a fairly handy class. Do a bit of work at home, heavy class, rest, another kind of heavy class rest, then a fesh. And after the fesh, because that'll be fairly probably heavy and hanging around, maybe a light day then. Mental practice and relaxation I'll talk about later. So it's just about thinking about your week. What can you do in your class? So say, for instance, you do a HIIT session in your class or wherever. That might take 15 minutes out of your class. So you just work that in as part of what you're doing. Or lights and balance. So one bunch of kids are doing their lights. The other guys are, while they're resting, they're doing some balance exercises and swap over. Just think about things like that. And that brings me on to load, training load. And I know somebody mentioned that back up along in terms of one of the issues. So training load is critical. It is one of the things that is least investigated in dancers, and it is one of the most important things. So there's a couple of key things. So load is not just how much we do. You have to multiply that by how hard it feels. So for me, set class, because I'm particularly fit and wonderful, might be really hard. So it might be 10 out of 10. For somebody who's fit and young, it might be a 2 out of 10. So the same class for 2 different people is going to be a very different experience. So you need to encourage your dancers to monitor the load that they are experiencing every week. So the training, the challenge is to find the balance between what's called the sweet spot between doing too little and doing too much. Do too much, they get injured, they get pissed off, they stop dancing, they get burnt out, they get overuse syndrome. You do too little, you don't build any strength, you don't build any resilience, they don't improve. So it's finding that training sweet spot and ramping things up gradually, called periodization, building it up. So we know that adolescent athletes, as I said, who have year-long round activity, they'll burn out. Okay, so when you're thinking about your load, and you should be thinking about it as a year. And again, as I've said, people who just do one sport all year round, in big trouble for injury. So you want to have graded prescription of your training loads to improve fitness and also make them a little bit more resilient. So I'm going to do a big talk on load, periodization, workshops, tapering, all that stuff in the next week or two. So I'm not going to go over a massive amount of it today, but it is critically important. That's why I'll do a full talk on it. So periodization is fancy planning, okay? So you have structured training phases, and every phase has a specific aim for the development of the dancer for a specific purpose. And you want to peak at the right time, and that's the whole idea. So this is kind of an idea. So you have a reasonably tough session, harder session, light, hard, lighter and light again, and the vital rest, okay? So you don't want to be bringing them in 3 days doing flat out heavies. You'll kill them, okay? And what you'll see is that the muscle soreness will start to go up over the week, and it'll decrease, and when we come back around to the start of the week, we'll be back to zero again. And what happens is their willingness to train will also start to drop a little bit and come back up again, okay? So in Irish dancing, in terms of load, these are Irish dancers and contemporary dancers, so we're both as crap as each other. We're up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. We should see nice, this is over a year, sorry, to be clear. We should see up, gradually up, gentle down, up, down. So it should kind of go up, 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 and then maybe down and up and up. So I had a sports guy who deals with loads of sports, analyze this, and somebody looked over his shoulder and said, who are these people? And this load management is crazy, and it is crazy, and it's something that planning really helps with. these are our adolescents, same stuff. And you can see hours and injuries kind of mirror when we go up, the injuries go up as well. Okay, so load management made simple, build up your workloads incrementally. So particularly important now after this mad phase of being at home, even though they might be doing a lot, they can't really dance flat out unless they have a ballroom or something in the house. So when you bring them back, don't go hell for leather. Start slow. Do lots of that kind of other cross-training stuff, balance stuff, tip through things, build them up, build them up, build them up. If you don't do that, they're going to be wrecked straight away. Avoid spikes. So you can monitor, and I would encourage everybody to monitor. If I put that in, I put it in, it'll be in the next talk, to monitor your load. So it's really simple. If you have a grid, and Monday I did 2 hours, and for me it felt like 7 out of 10. So that is 14 units for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you look at the week overall. So you might have 70 units of load over the week. If you were to see that jump to 140 the next week, that's a massive spike. And there's lots of evidence to show that if you have that big kind of a spike, you're more likely to get injured. As I said, alternate hard days, moderate days, easy days, and rest. Can't stress it enough. Dancers look at rest day as a wasted day. It is important for your body to recover, for your strength and your performance gains that you've made to manifest and embed in your brain and in your body. So there's good physiological reasons for you to rest, as well as just not burning somebody out. And then you always need to, this needs to be personalized to the dancer. So they need to take a certain amount of responsibility for it themselves. And they need to be mindful that when it's a very stressful period like exams, or if they've had a relationship issue or a family issue, you may need to moderate their load back down because they're going to be at more at risk of injury in those situations as well. For teens, this is a nice guideline. Total training per week for everything should not exceed their age. So if they are 15, they do 15 hours of stuff a week. Integrate appropriate strength and balance into classes, like I've shown you how to do that, and we spoke about specialization. Dancers need to take ownership of this, have a training log. A copybook is fine. In my next talk, I'll show you how to do that, and there's also a nice app that they can use. And then competition should be monitored carefully to make sure that they're not doing too much for their age, and we'll talk about all of this much more next time. Okay, so any questions on anything so far? So we've looked, the ones that we can modify so far are kind of our general warm-up, cool down, strength conditioning, physical issues really, load and so on. Everybody still with me? Everybody, anyone fallen asleep? I've lost 3 people, I got boring obviously. Thanks Ian. Okay, you're there. Okay, so the next thing, general health. There's lots and lots of evidence to show that if you have persistent, like kind of low levels of ill health, you're more at risk for dancing. So if you get lots of colds, flus, doesn't have to be anything serious. But also if you're sick, don't go to dancing, okay? So you are at more of a risk of injury. And I know that can kill teachers, especially if they're doing teams, but the last thing you want to do is for your whole team to go down. Sleep is massive. If you have less than 8 hours of sleep a night, there's on a ongoing period, not just a one-off or what now and then, that's no problem. Don't be worried about that. But if you have persistent low levels of sleep, particularly in those teenage years when they need lots of sleep, you're going to have decrements in performance, you're going to have issues with attention and recall, and all that stuff can cause injury. And you'll just be less well physically and psychologically. So performance and injury are common consequences. As I said, for adolescents, it's even more important. Their brains are maturing, their body is growing, they need lots of sleep. And there's lots of challenges to sleep for Irish dancers. Training is a big one. If we train too much, too late in the evening, that interferes with sleep patterns. So it can delay sleep onset, or what's called sleep latency. So as much as possible to try and prevent classes going very late in the evening. Competition stress, so there's lots of evidence to show that solo dancers in particular, not so much team dancers, they have a lot of anxiety, and that can manifest in reduction of sleep quantity and quality. And there's lots of techniques around relaxation and mindfulness and goal setting that can help to overcome that. Poor general health is comorbid with poor sleep. So if you've poor health, that can often manifest as poor sleep and vice versa. And one of the big ones for dancers, particularly these days in terms of the Irish dance international calendar and us traveling all over the place. So there would have been lots of people getting ready to come to Ireland for the World this week, next week. Jet lag is a big thing, also for professional dancers who travel a lot. Jet lag is massively problematic, and being able to deal with that is very important. We've done another, this is from last year when the Worlds in North Carolina, so myself and Scott have done a video specifically about jet lag, tips on how to manage it, things to do, things to avoid, exercises to do on the plane, and so on. So I recommend, again, if you have a chance, you can go and have a look at that, and that'll give you some ideas. For people, are there any resources you'd recommend outlining the importance of sleep to dancers? I do. There's very little research on sleep in dance. I have a chapter in my book, which is very good. And maybe if you send me your email afterwards, I'd be able to send that the chapter on. I don't want to be kind of flogging my book or something, but this is a bespoke chapter on it, Clodagh. So if you PM me afterwards, my details are below. I'll be able to send you out some resources on that. But typically across all genres of dance, there's very, very little. Okay. But some tips for people who are bad sleepers, your dancers, and you see them wandering in and they're knackered and they're just too fatigued. So the bed is for sleeping in. It's not for iPads, computers, phones, TV. It is, all those things are parked a couple of hours before you go to bed as much as possible, so that your brain is able to detach. Or you don't really want your brain to detach. That's a very bad idea. So your brain can basically kind of cool down a little bit. The blue light from all those screens stimulates your brain, so that's why you want to avoid it. Routine is important. Set a regular bedtime and a regular wake up time. So even at the weekends, don't be sleeping until 3 to 12, whatever it is. Get up at your normal time. And again, that's very challenging for adolescents, because the way their body clock is set, they go to bed earlier and wake up later. They go to bed later and wake up later. But as much as you can, try and introduce routine. Avoid long naps. Keep the environment as consistent as you can, and that can be challenging for people who are traveling a lot, like professional dancers, or for jet lag. But a nice cool room, a dark room, a quiet room. Avoiding any caffeine or stimulating drinks in the radio in the afternoon or late evening. And then, as I said, avoiding radio, TV, phone, and such. And don't worry on Julie. If you have a couple of nights of bad sleep, it's not the end of the world. It's only when this becomes a persistent problem that you need to worry about it. And there's lots of interventions, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, ACT therapy, that is really effective in dealing with this. So if anybody needs resources, I can get on to you about that. Okay, so the next one then, we're getting into more nebulous territory, I suppose, is emotion and cognition. So there's lots of evidence to show that people who have poor emotional health, and it doesn't need to be a pathology, it doesn't need to be a sickness or anything, have worse injury, more severe injury, more persistent injury. So stress resilience is one thing. So people who are more resilient to stress have better coping strategies, more positive outlook, tend to do better. They don't tend to incur as many injuries, and they don't tend to last as long. So there's lots of evidence to show that poor mood or low mood, in particular things like anger and frustration, tend to be associated with injury. And we're not sure why, but it's something to watch out for in your dancers if it's a new thing in particular. Catastrophizing and pain beliefs is a big one. So catastrophizing means that you think the worst case scenario all the time. So you think, my ankle is sprained, I'm never going to dance again, my foot is going to drop off, and this is the worst thing that's ever happened, and this pain will never get better. And there are people who are catastrophizers, and we all know them. So we know people who catastrophize have a much more profound experience of injury, they get injured more, and it lasts for longer. And similarly, pain beliefs. So people who have a very, what's called passive locus of control. So they don't think there's anything they can do about their pain, and they think their pain is harm. So I think the pain equates to damage of structures, and that's not always the same thing. But people who have negative pain beliefs and don't think there's anything they can do themselves to handle their pain, they tend to be more injured. So, you're probably all thinking of people that who manifest like this, and just think about how injured they've gotten. Passion for dance is a really interesting one. There's been lots of research done in other genres as well. So we all love dancing. That's why we're here. That's why we get involved in this crazy activity. But people can either have an adaptive passion for dance or a maladaptive passion for dance. So an adaptive passion for dance is you love it. It doesn't take over your life completely. It doesn't completely define you. It's part of your identity. If you get injured and you feel it's a bad injury, you'll stop and you'll deal with the injury appropriately. Okay? So a small subsection of dancers have a maladaptive passion for dance. So these are the guys who will keep dancing no matter what. These are the guys whose legs are falling off, who have stress fractures, who are in huge amounts of pain and don't stop. And these people get the get the career-threatening and career-ending injuries. They have much more chronic injuries, which means they last for much, much longer. So you need to keep an eye out for these guys. And if they need to stop, you need to make them stop, or you need to educate them about the importance of stopping now so that you will have a long and healthy career, and that there's always the next time. So it is a really important one, and I see lots of it in dancers. Task and ego orientation are similar. So task orientation is people who are fulfilled by accomplishment. Ego orientation are the glory boys, so the champions, and it's not everybody, but it's kind of an inherent part of being really competitive and wanting to win. But they're very much defined by whether they've been successful or not. And because a lot of this is outside of our control, you know, adjudicators and all the things that go with that, what happens on the day, people who have an ego orientation can have a very poor experience of results, but of injury also, okay, because it defines them so much. So supporting that dancer and giving them goals and giving them structure and having a plan about what we're going to do if the worst comes to the worst and they get last or that they can't dance or whatever. Coping mechanisms really important. So are they positive copers? So will they take strategies to address their injury, reduce their injury, prevent injury, or are they just this external locus of control? I can't help it. If it happens, there's nothing I can do about it. I'll be out for ages. So know your dancers, or know yourself if you're a dancer here. Anticipate your problems and support yourself, or have peers support you or support your dancer. And I would always say that you need to have non-Irish dancing related results or non-results related events and rewards. So after the World, we are all going out and we're all going to go roller skating, no matter what happens. So having things that have nothing to do with results, nothing to do with dancing, that are fun, that just improve people's experience of dancing. So a little off track for injury, but just this whole realm of the personality and the emotional profile of the dancer and how that intersects with injuries is very important to be aware of. Social and lifestyle, we're nearly getting there, guys. I'm talking a bit too much. So when dancers are injured, they have a much deeper experience of it. So social support is really important. So whether that's peer support, parents, teachers, so not letting them hang in, checking in with them, having goals setting to move them on through their injury recovery. This is really important after your dance career as well. There's also a little bit of research, not in Irish dancing, but in ballet and contemporary, that shows that social support for female dancers comes more from both parents, where for male dancers it's peers, teachers, then parents. So just to be mindful about the support that may be there. Parents are role models. The parent-teacher dynamic is really important, and it's an area that I've explored a little bit. And it's very important that is supported in terms of that everyone's on the same page for what we're trying to achieve, and how we manage injury, and how we prevent injury, and how we prescribe load, and how much dancing the child is doing, and the other factors that may influence their injury experience, their performance experience. Just being mindful of social media and what's out there, and just getting your advice, your support from appropriate sources, and not reading. Any physio tell you they hear some mad solutions and suggestions. So making sure that you get your advice from an appropriate support. And look at us during the COVID community. There's some brilliant resources and support. So trying to maintain that. So not VOI, but other good stuff. Also really important that you access a medical professional who knows about dancing if you're injured. So there's lots of research to show that Irish dancers obviously prefer going to somebody who knows what they're talking about, they trust them, they speak their own language. So as I've said before, get somebody who knows what they're talking about or who's willing to upskill. Make sure that you rehab appropriately. Don't rush dancers back, and don't let them rush themselves back. And as I said, make sure that the physician is matching the rehab to the requirements of dancers. So if you need to teach them, then you teach them. Nutrition, hugely important. Not my area, but there's lots of evidence to say that poor nutrition leads to injury. So there is a study that has been done by a colleague of mine in the UK who was the leading dance nutritionist in Europe on Irish dancers. And what she's found out is that Irish dancers' knowledge about nutrition is really crap. So they don't know what's what's carbohydrate, what's fat, what's protein, what they're for, what a balanced diet is. Their nutrition intake is suboptimal, so they're not getting enough of the vitamins, minerals, the big food groups that they need. There are some concerning findings of body composition, so our fat levels tend to be a little bit higher in some dancers. I don't want to generalize that, but more so around attitudes to food and appearance. So less so than other dance genres, but there are issues around disordered eating and maladaptive attitudes to eating. So just being mindful of that, because that's obviously going to have huge implications for injury and for performance, in addition to their physical, psychological well-being. The consequences of poor nutrition are poor concentration, which will inevitably lead to injury, poor repair and recovery. So if you don't eat well, your body doesn't have the nutrients that it needs to fix your body if it's injured. Energy and performance are both massively reduced, and in the longer term it can lead to problems with bone health like osteoporosis and so on. Happily, dancers, all the loading that we do is really protective for bone health going forward. So that's a good side of the story. Some of the challenges and ideas. So early morning starts at Feshes, dancing at 8 o'clock in the morning, and trying to eat before that is really difficult. So thinking about preloading the night before what you eat to allow slow release of energy, and obviously what you will eat that morning before the Fesh. The food at Fesh venues can be really poor in my experience. So packing, preparing, having cooling facilities, lots of snacks, lots of things that people can eat, that can graze away as they need to during the day. There's extra challenges for vegans and vegetarians, so they might need some additional support and help. And hydration is really important, so making sure that that you hydrate really well, that you eat and hydrate within a short period after a demanding dance session. So education is really important, and what I'm going to do is get a dance nutritionist on to talk about nutrition and dance. So I'll post about that. As I said, plan and pack for the next day, preload the night before. And just a good tip is the more ingredients something has on the box, the less good it is for you, and the more colour it has, the more good it is for you. Smoking, drinking illegal drugs, bad. Smoking is my big bugbear. There's nothing good about this in terms of injury and performance. It'll slow healing dramatically because you don't have oxygen-rich blood. You're robbing your blood of the oxygen that it needs to go and heal structures. It'll slow down the healing, reduce blood flow, reduces cardiovascular capacity. So people have not as much in the tank when they dance because they're smokers. Affects performance and on and on and on and on. I could rant about this for ages, as my students will tell you. But anyway, just make sure that your pupils or yourselves are educated about smoking and don't do it. Dance environment, people have mentioned this before, so we all know this. So flooring, dancing on solid concrete floor, solid wood floors, carpets, if they're over something solid, no good, and can lead to lots of those overuse injuries, stress fractures and so on. Ventilation is really important as well. Appropriate heat, not too hot, not too cool, and appropriate light. So there's white papers with guidelines for all of this that are really useful to try and adapt. So I might put up some resources about how you can adapt your dance environment to make it as good as you can. Just sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. So minimizing. So if you're on a concrete floor for whatever reason, no stamping, no big jumps. Just try and minimize that impact unless so completely necessary. And the other thing then is footwear. So dance footwear and non-dance footwear. So again, this is an area in and of itself. So a quick whistle stop tour through foot type. So on the left is what's called a pronated foot. So the feet kind of fall in. This is a normal foot. And this is what's called a supinated foot. So it kind of leans out. So these guys are prone to ankle fractures, and these guys get lots of tendinopathies, plantar fasciopathies, lots of things up along the legs. So if you have one of these foot types and you've no problems, not an issue. It's only an issue if there's pain or problems with your foot. Sometimes they'll manifest when people start to grow or whatever. So good footwear. So if you have a foot like this, don't be hanging around in your light shoes all day. It'll aggravate it. Get out of your light shoes. And don't be wearing things like slippers or Uggs or Converse or Dockers or anything like that. You need a shoe with a bit of a heel that's going to take you out into a position more like this. So if you walk around and you've got a tendinopathy or you've got something going on and you walk around all day long in a really flat shoe, whether it's a dancing shoe or a non-dancing shoe, you can see that tendon is going to be under pressure because everything's going to fall in, and you're going to have lots and lots of pain and discomfort. So a good chat to your physio or somebody who knows about feet is really recommended also. And lastly, and I'm nearly there. Okay, so we have an ethos in Irish dancing and a culture in Irish dancing, and it's the same in all dancers of the dance genres, that the show must go on. Okay, it's inherent in teachers, it's inherent in dancers. We are afraid to stop because the Munster is coming, the world is coming, the nationals are coming, something's coming up, and we need to dance. But what we're doing is we're normalizing pain, we're normalizing injury, we're potentially creating long-term problems for dancers, and it's not okay. So it's something we as a dance profession broadly need to kind of get rid of, this culture of concealment. So I've done research that has shown that younger dancers are sometimes afraid to tell their parents or their teachers that they're injured in case they'll be taken out of the team or they'll be stopped doing something. So we need to normalize pain. We need to, the sooner you stop things. So this here, for any of you Monty Python Holy Grail fans, if the Black Knight had stopped when his arm was cut off, instead of saying it's only a flesh wound, he wouldn't have been finished as just a torso with no arms and no legs. So we need to have longer term vistas. We need to think there is always next year. And I'll do a talk shortly about coming back from injury. And being off is an opportunity to build yourself up to be better, stronger, more polished dancer. So we need to maybe address that kind of culture that we have in Irish dancing, to protect our dancers and just to make them healthier and more and dancers with longer careers. Take home points for any of you who are still with me, and fair play to you. Oh, there's a few who've joined us. Irish dancers get injured a lot. That's not news to nobody. You all knew that. We continue to dance with pain and injured a lot. Not always appropriate. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes we can modify. Sometimes we absolutely must stop. And we need to take ownership of that, and dancers need to be educated about that. There's lots of factors that influence injury. Not always the ones that we think of, but they're important too. But there's much, much more around it. And it's just a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of planning can go a long way. There's lots of opportunities to make our dancers better, stronger, healthier, fitter, more resilient, more robust. But it takes a village. So you need to have, your dancers on board, your health professionals, your parents, everybody feeds into this. So it takes a village to build everybody up and to support them and make your person a happier dancer as well. So in terms of further information, if anybody wants any of the studies I spoke to you about, they're really boring and technical, but I'll send them to you. This is my email address. This is our Facebook address, which I'd say a lot of you are familiar with, since I posted this on it predominantly. So we put up lots of resources, ideas, videos and stuff up there. And if there's anything you want us to talk about, just send us a message, because we are really responsive to what you want to do. This is my book. The publishers are making it stupid expensive, so maybe wait till it gets a bit cheaper, unless you've loads of money. But this covers absolutely everything in Irish dancing. So it covers the evolution of dancing, all the health and fitness stuff, the nutrition stuff, psychology of dance, parenting, older dancers, adolescent dancers, professional dancers, sleep, what else? Dance loads of stuff, injury management and return, all that stuff. So everything I could possibly think of, and I wrote it with lots of experts from around the world and different things. If you are anxious to have it, the ebook is there's 40% off the ebook if you use this promotion until May 31st. But as I said, I don't really mind. I'll send you out anything I can. I can't send you the book because I'm not allowed. It's copyright. But if I can send anything, I will. Upcoming sessions. So Scott Murphy, my superstar partner, is going to be doing strength and conditioning session for Irish dancers and teachers coming up shortly, and I'll post information on that. Next week, I will do a session on training, load prescription and monitoring, periodization, tapering and workshop. So this is the thing that I was talking about, load, and this is a session in itself, and I think one of the most important things for teachers in particular, but also dancers, to know how to monitor how they're getting on. And then we'll also do a session on a Q&A session on kind of all things dance related with myself and Scott, and they're coming up over the next couple of weeks. Thank you to all of my fellow research, and most of all to yourselves for showing up. I was very worried I was going to be talking to myself, so I'm very grateful to you. And now, if anybody has any questions, what I might do, you can type them, I suppose, in case everybody starts asking things together, but don't ask me anything too hard. Or no specific injury questions, because I'd need to see the dancer. So thank you, Liz. Thanks, Ian. Okay, take care, Aaron. Do I do my own podcast? I don't, Dominic. This is, I'm too busy. So I did do a podcast with Martin Purcell, but I'm not sure if it's no longer, if it's still available. But what I'd say is the Complete Dancer project is probably the best way to go. And now that we've all got more techie savvy, I'll probably do more of these, but shorter ones. This was kind of a much longer one than I expected, but I'll do shorter ones and I'll get guest speakers on. Did I say that? Yeah, I'll, if you just take my email there, so roisin.cahalan, or if you send the Complete Dancer project a message, that's probably the handiest. And I'll send on the PowerPoint. Thank you all for the nice comments, and thank you for spending some time with me. No questions. See you, Cormac. Say hi to Nat and the guys. Lovely to see some familiar faces and friends. And lovely to see people I don't know who don't feel obliged to show up. No questions. Okay, so I will post this anyway. I'll post the video on my YouTube channel, which is about 4 things on it. It's not really a channel. And then I will also make the PowerPoint available, but it'll be there anyway. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, I will call a halt to it. I went over a little bit, but thank you very much to everybody for joining, and please feel free to share the link to the video and tell your friends about it. Hey Nat, I've just spent the time with you as well. Hope everybody's well. And I look forward to seeing you next time. So maybe we'll get up to 30 or 40 next time. Okay, everybody stay safe. I hope you're safe and well wherever you are. Figure out how to stop it now.